If you have ever wondered whether a single quiet act can change the fate of an entire place, this story is for you. There are no loud heroes here and no swift victories. There is only cold wind, a dusty road, and people who make their choices when no one is watching. Stay until the end, because only in the final moments does it become clear what everything began for. And if stories where faith, work, and attachment grow slowly but last forever speak to you, subscribe to the Dust and Devotion Tales channel. This is where such stories live. The mountains of Montana held no mercy for May, the snow falling in thick, unrelenting layers that smothered the narrow pass and erased the faint trail that wind and wildlife had carved through the years. Ethan Blake's post station crouched against the cold, a small refuge of wood and stone amid the endless white. The world outside was quiet, save for the wind that cut across the ridges, rattling shutters and flinging snow against the walls. He moved through his routine with careful, measured steps, the rhythm of duties and solitude shaping his days since his wife had died. Time had contracted into a steady line of chores, maintenance, and the constant vigilance the mountains demanded. Each day mirrored the last, a narrow corridor of survival and memory, until the morning when he saw the disruption. Across the pass lay a wagon overturned, wheels half buried in snow, equipment scattered in disarray, and no sign of the horses that should have pulled it. Ethan's eyes followed the slope and found her crouched beside the wreckage, her body small against the expanse of snow. Fingers stiff with frost, knees bruised and cut, shoulders trembling against the wind. She did not cry out, but struggled to rise with every ounce of remaining strength. The sight unsettled something deep in him, a shift in the quiet equilibrium he had built around himself. Without hesitation, he moved toward her, lifting her with careful strength, feeling the immediate weight of her weariness pressing against his own frame as he carried her to the station. Each step across the snowed-over ground brought with it the realization that she was not merely lost or delayed. She carried a presence that intruded upon the ordered stillness he had relied on, a gravity that pressed into the corners of the cabin even before the door shut behind them. Inside, the fire struggled against the cold that seeped through every seam, casting flickering shadows across the bare walls, illuminating the simple furnishings and the quiet life he had carved for himself. She did not move much, only settled, shivering slightly, as the warmth touched her skin, and Ethan could see in the tight lines of her face the imprint of the journey she had endured. Her breath came shallow, ragged from exposure, and the snow clinging to her clothes hinted at hours of struggle through the pass. He began to tend her injuries, carefully wrapping her hands, assessing her leg, the routine motions of aid taking him through the shock of intrusion. He realized, with a subtle, insistent clarity, that she was no ordinary traveler. There was weight in the way she carried herself, even in exhaustion. A story that pressed upon the room with the quiet insistence of wind against the walls. The storm outside screamed over the ridges, rattling timbers and shaking the small structure. But inside, there was a new rhythm, a tension that neither the snow nor his years of solitude had prepared him for. He tended her quietly, moving around the cabin with care, as if the very act of his steps could disturb the fragile equilibrium between them. The snow continued to pile against the windows, muting sound and light, and for the first time in years, he felt the stillness he had known so well begin to fracture. Every glance she cast toward him, every slight motion, carried more than exhaustion. It carried intent, history, and a presence that demanded acknowledgement. He did not yet understand the depth of what she bore with her, only that it would not allow him to remain passive, that the routine, the carefully drawn boundaries of his life, were no longer enough to contain what had arrived on the pass. Hours passed with the wind howling and snow piling higher, and Ethan moved between small duties, tending to the fire, adjusting blankets, offering water. The quiet became dense with anticipation, the air seeming to weigh heavier with every breath they shared in the room. Even without words, the woman carried a force, a subtle claim on the space around her, as if the mountains themselves had brought her here, with a purpose that had little to do with chance. By the time the storm began to abate, the snow settling in heavy drifts against the cabin walls, Ethan understood that nothing in the mountains would ever feel the same again. The arrival of this woman had shifted the axis of his existence, introducing a presence that could not be ignored, a quiet upheaval that demanded both vigilance and care. And though the wind still roared outside, and the world beyond the post station remained cold and unyielding, the cabin held a fragile warmth, a proof that even in the harshest place, change could arrive quietly, on frostbitten fingers and weary shoulders, and insist upon its place. Sarah Caldwell returned to consciousness slowly, as if the world had to be rebuilt piece by piece. The ceiling above her was low and plain, darkened by years of smoke, the beams sturdy and unadorned. The air smelled of wood, ash, and clean cold. Nothing in the room suggested softness or ornament. There were no curtains, no personal tokens, no traces of a woman's presence. Yet everything was orderly, deliberate, and sound. The space held the kind of care that did not announce itself, the care of someone who fixed what was broken because it needed fixing, not because anyone would see. Her hands ached dully, wrapped and stiff, and her leg throbbed with a steady insistence. She tested her breath, then her awareness, grounding herself in the quiet. When she turned her head, she saw the crate near the wall, its lid cracked but intact. Inside it rested her camera, cleaned of snow, arranged with careful attention. The sight of it anchored her. Whatever had been lost on the mountain, not everything had been taken from her. The world she carried with her still existed. Ethan Blake watched from a distance, not out of suspicion, but from habit. Years of solitude had taught him how to share space without intrusion. He noticed how she took stock of the room, how she assessed her condition without complaint or panic. She did not reach for him or ask for reassurance. When strength returned to her hands, she used it to help where she could, folding cloth, rinsing cups, moving carefully through the small tasks that filled the hours. When pain or weakness overtook her, she waited without impatience, conserving herself with quiet resolve. As the storm loosened its grip on the mountains, time stretched into a measured calm. Ethan learned her rhythms through observation rather than conversation. She rose slowly, favored her injured leg, and spent long moments watching the light shift through the small windows. He came to understand that she was not merely passing through the land, but studying it, collecting its shape and weight. The camera was not an accessory, it was a way of seeing. When her strength allowed, she began to work. She set the camera with care, positioning it toward the station, the snow-laden roof, the fence half buried by drifts. She waited patiently for the light, for the moment when shadow and brightness found balance. She photographed the mountains not as obstacles, but as forms of endurance. In the mornings, when the sun broke through the clouds and struck the snow at a shallow angle, she captured the quiet brilliance that followed the storm, light held still on glass. Ethan observed these moments from the edge of her activity. He watched her measure the world through the lens, noticed how she did not rush the act, how she allowed the place to reveal itself rather than forcing it into shape. Through her work, something unfamiliar stirred in him. The post station, which had long felt like a boundary he could not cross, appeared different when seen through her attention. It was no longer merely a point of isolation on a forgotten route. It became a marker of continuity, a place that endured because someone remained. The mountains framed the station with stark honesty, and the images she made reflected that truth without harshness. She captured the wear on the wood, the uneven lines of the fence, the tracks in the snow leading nowhere and everywhere at once. Ethan found himself seeing details he had long stopped noticing. The way light rested on the table at dawn, the steadiness of the walls against the wind, the quiet dignity of a place that asked nothing more than care. In her presence, the station began to feel less like a refuge from loss and more like a foundation. Ethan realized that for years he had mistaken stillness for absence. What Sarah revealed, without words or insistence, was that stillness could also hold meaning. The images she created did not change the mountains or the work required to survive them, but they altered the way he understood his place within them. As days passed, the routine of the station expanded to include her quiet movements, the click of the camera, the careful handling of fragile plates. The space adjusted around her without resistance. Ethan did not question this shift. He sensed that something essential was taking shape, something rooted not in disruption, but in recognition. Through the light she captured and the patience she practiced, the post station transformed from a solitary outpost into a point of connection, a place where endurance was not merely endured, but witnessed. The snow receded slowly from the pass, retreating into dark patches along the slopes and revealing the narrow road that had been buried for weeks. With it came movement. The first travelers appeared cautiously, their wagons creaking, their horses thin from winter. The post station returned to its purpose, no longer suspended in isolation, but threaded once again into the wider world. With the travelers came voices, and with the voices came judgment. People noticed the woman. They noticed her presence at the station, her quiet work, her lack of visible attachment. Questions formed easily in the thin mountain air. Some saw disorder in her staying, a disruption of rules that had never needed to be spoken. Others framed her as a temptation, a complication that did not belong in a place defined by predictability and restraint. A few measured her more practically, weighing her worth against the supplies she consumed and the space she occupied. The conclusions varied, but the unease was shared. Ethan felt the shift immediately. The station, once a place of neutral passage, now carried the weight of attention. By allowing Sarah to remain, he had altered the balance he had long maintained. Responsibility extended beyond providing shelter or care. It now included the consequences of association, the scrutiny of those who believed order depended on clear boundaries. He understood that neutrality was no longer available to him. The choice had already been made, even if it had never been spoken aloud. Sarah sensed the change in subtle ways. The glances lingered longer. The pauses in conversation grew heavier. She recognized the signs well. This was the moment that usually preceded departure, the quiet tightening of space that signaled it was time to move on. She began to prepare herself for leaving, sorting her equipment, measuring her strength, calculating the distance to the next town. The habit was familiar, almost comforting in its certainty. Yet something resisted. Each step toward departure felt heavier than expected. The station no longer felt like a temporary refuge. It had become a place where her presence mattered, where her work had meaning beyond documentation. The light she captured here was not fleeting. The mountains, the station, and the man who maintained it formed a continuity she had not anticipated. For the first time, The urge to leave was not driven by necessity or fear, but by the weight of choice. Ethan watched her quietly, aware of the tension that had settled between the walls. He did not interfere, nor did he retreat. He recognized the moment for what it was, a threshold neither of them could cross without consequence. The road that led through the station no longer pointed only outward, it curved inward as well, toward responsibility, toward connection, toward a future that demanded more than endurance. As the days lengthened and the snow gave way to earth, the station stood at a crossroads of its own making. The road brought people, opinions, and pressure, but it also revealed the cost of isolation. In the space between arrival and departure, both Ethan and Sarah understood that remaining would require more than survival. It would require commitment. And leaving, for the first time, would mean abandoning something that had begun to take root. The conflict surfaced without drama, but its weight was unmistakable. The representatives from the county arrived with measured politeness and carefully chosen authority, making it clear that the station was expected to remain orderly, neutral, and predictable. A woman without clear ties or purpose did not fit within that expectation. Her presence raised questions, and questions, they implied, led to instability. The message did not need to be spoken twice. Sarah was considered an unnecessary complication. Ethan listened without interruption. He understood the structure that governed the territory, the unwritten agreements that allow remote places to function without interference. The post station existed because it was reliable and unremarkable. It was meant to pass people through, not hold them. For years, he had upheld that balance through discipline and distance. Now that balance was being tested, not by defiance, but by the quiet reality of another person's existence within its walls. His decision did not come from stubbornness or impulse. It came from clarity. He recognized that allowing events to unfold without intervention was itself a choice, one that would undo what had already been set in motion. He stepped forward and assumed responsibility openly was forfeited. Retreat was no longer an option. The station became defined not only by its purpose, but by the people who sustained it. The response was immediate, if restrained. Perceptions shifted. Some saw risk, others saw resolve, and a few recognized the quiet authority in a man willing to claim consequence as readily as duty. The station no longer belonged solely to the road. It belonged to a choice that had been made in full view of the land and those who crossed it. Sarah understood what the decision cost him. She also understood what it demanded of her. Staying could no longer mean shelter without contribution or presence without commitment. She accepted the weight of that understanding without hesitation. Her decision to remain was not rooted in gratitude or fear of the road. It was deliberate. She chose to become part of the station's rhythm, its labor, and its endurance. She worked without complaint, learning the demands of the place and meeting them steadily. Time became her offering. Patience became her currency. She did not seek to soften the station or change its nature, only to belong within it honestly. Each day reinforced the reality of her choice, shaping her role not as a guest or exception, but as a constant. Under the open sky, the station stood unchanged in structure, but altered in meaning. What had once been a point of passage became a shared ground of responsibility. The road still came and went, indifferent to human resolve, but within its reach, something firm had taken hold. The choice made there did not promise ease or acceptance. It promised continuity, built slowly, upheld by work, and anchored by the understanding that some commitments, once claimed, could not be undone. The past returned along the mountain pass with the same quiet inevitability as weather. A familiar figure appeared where the road narrowed, carrying recognition that did not need explanation. He belonged to a chapter of Sarah's life she had deliberately left behind, a life shaped by dependence, expectation, and limited choices. His presence carried knowledge of who she had been and why she had run, and that knowledge threatened the fragile balance she and Ethan had built through patience and restraint. The station felt altered the moment he arrived. The routines that had steadied the days seemed less certain, as if the walls themselves were listening. The danger did not lie in open conflict, but in implication. The past did not need to speak loudly to exert influence. Its power came from memory and familiarity, from the suggestion that what had been could still define what was. Ethan felt the tension immediately. His instinct was to intervene, to assert control through position or authority, but he quickly understood the limits of such actions. This was not a situation that could be resolved through force or declaration. Any attempt to shield Sarah directly would risk undermining the independence she had claimed and earned. The realization unsettled him. For the first time, protection required absence rather than presence. He faced a choice that demanded trust rather than certainty. By stepping back, he accepted vulnerability, acknowledging that he could not manage every outcome or erase every threat. His restraint was deliberate. He chose to allow Sarah the space to confront what had followed her, without interference or supervision. In doing so, he affirmed her agency and respected the strength she had demonstrated since arriving at the station. Sarah recognized the moment for what it was. The return of her past did not bring panic, but it did stir reflection. She understood how easily old patterns could reassert themselves if allowed space. Yet the life she now lived had reshaped her sense of self. The work she shared, the stillness she had learned to value, and the continuity she had helped build had given her something the road never had. The station was not an escape, it was a choice. She faced the presence of her past without submission or defiance. There was no need to erase it or deny its existence. It belonged to her history, but it no longer governed her present. What had once defined her circumstances had lost its authority through time, effort, and intention. The life she now inhabited stood on different ground. The past lingered briefly, testing the strength of what had replaced it. Then it withdrew, leaving the way it had come. There was no victory claimed, no closure declared. It departed quietly, not defeated, but diminished. Its power had dissolved in the face of a life no longer shaped by its terms. When the road cleared again, the station resumed its rhythm. The tension eased, though the experience left its mark. Ethan understood that trust was not passive acceptance, but an active decision to honor another person's autonomy. By allowing Sarah to close that door herself, he acknowledged her as an equal participant in the life they shared, not someone defined by protection alone. What remained after the past departed was not relief, but clarity. The station stood unchanged, yet strengthened by the knowledge that its foundation rested not on avoidance, but on chosen commitment. The balance they had built endured, because it was rooted in respect rather than control. The road continued to carry people through the mountains, indifferent to individual histories. But within its reach, something lasting had been affirmed. Time passed with deliberate slowness, marked not by urgency, but by the rhythm of daily life and the quiet accumulation of small moments. The post station changed subtly yet unmistakably. Its walls, once a shield against the isolation of snow-laden passes and harsh winds, began to radiate warmth. The simple furnishings took on a sense of care. The fire flickered with steadier glow, and the air carried the faint scent of human presence, lived in and tended. Snow continued to drift across the surrounding mountains, piling in soft white drifts against the edges of the station. But inside, there was order, a careful structure born of attention and necessity. Sarah Caldwell moved through this space with quiet determination, tending her camera, arranging her workspace, photographing not merely what lay before her eyes, but the story of the life they were building together. Each image captured more than light and shadow. It preserved the endurance of wood and stone, the subtle play of winter sunlight through frost-laced windows, the marks of effort etched into every surface. In her work, the post station ceased to be just a shelter and became a chronicle, a testament to persistence, care, and the slow cultivation of belonging. Ethan Blake observed this transformation with measured attention. He moved through the station not as a man constrained by grief or routine, but as someone learning to inhabit the present alongside another. His eyes lingered on small details he had long overlooked: the way light rested upon a table at dawn, the subtle shifts in shadow across the walls, the quiet balance between heat from the fire and the chill that pressed against the timber from the mountains. He discovered that devotion was not a single declaration or act of courage, but a pattern repeated each day. The tending of the fire, the straightening of blankets, the quiet acknowledgement of another's presence. He learned that the act of remaining, of witnessing, of sharing responsibility, carried weight and meaning beyond any spoken word. Days stretched into weeks and weeks into months. Winters remained harsh, their cold biting and unyielding, and the road leading to the station continued to test travelers with mud, snow, and uneven terrain. Yet within the cabin, a stability had taken root. The post station, once merely a waypoint for the passing world, had become a home, a place shaped not only by survival but by intention and choice. Sarah's photographs continued to record the rhythms of this life, capturing subtle changes in light, texture, and human movement. The mountains outside remained indifferent, their presence vast and uncompromising. But inside, the life they contained was deliberate, sustained, and quietly triumphant. Ethan discovered that his days no longer revolved around memory or absence. He lived in the moments defined by care, observation, and the rhythms of shared labor. The station's routines became shared rituals, each act of maintenance or preparation reinforced by participation, each quiet hour a reinforcement of the life they had chosen together. Sarah's presence no longer felt temporary or fragile. It had become integral, the pulse of continuity within the structure of walls and fire. He understood that trust, patience, and presence were not abstract virtues, but tangible forces, shaping the station's character and grounding their lives. The passage of time revealed more than endurance. It revealed perspective. Where Ethan had once seen isolation and hardship, he now recognized purpose and belonging. Where Sarah had once traveled with the uncertainty of the road pressing against her, she now understood the weight of choice, the slow accumulation of commitment, the way one life could anchor another without claim or control. Their daily existence, mundane in its motions, yet profound in its persistence, transformed the station from a point of survival into a locus of meaning. The post station endured storms, blizzards, and the relentless sweep of seasons. Snow piled high, wind howled across the ridges, and the mountains retained their stark severity. Yet inside, there was a home. Firelight flickered over walls worn smooth by effort and care. Photographs recorded light held in place like memories, preserved on fragile plates. And the quiet presence of two people committed to shared life filled the space with meaning. Nothing here was loud or dramatic. There was no need for proclamation, no call for attention. The quiet continuity of labor, observation, and companionship was enough to make the station permanent, resilient against winter, indifference, and time itself. The conclusion of this story did not arrive with fanfare. It was subtle, unspoken, like the soft glow captured on a glass plate, or the faint warmth that lingered in a room after the fire died to embers. The post station had become a home in every sense, a place of choice, of endurance, and of mutual care. Ethan and Sarah had built it together, day by day, decision by decision, creating a life that was steady, patient, and enduring. The mountains still loomed, the snow still fell, and the road remained challenging. But here, in this small, deliberate space, there was permanence, and there was quiet joy. If you are drawn to stories of careful choice, steadfast patience, and love unspoken yet deeply felt, subscribe to Dust and Devotion Tales, where every story waits for its listener.